Edgar Cayce's astonishing revelation. Love is the universal law. What if everything we call a law of nature, gravity, attraction, cause and effect, even the impulse that heals, are simply different faces of one underlying principle? Edgar Cayce, the healer and seer whose readings reached across body and soul, came to a claim so radical it reorients how we see illness, suffering, relationships, and the cosmos. That love is not merely an emotion or moral command. It is the organizing, creative intelligence at the heart of reality. This is the astonishment, because if that is true, then the path to healing, to meaning, and to transformation looks very different than we've been taught. If this idea resonates with you, and you want more frameworks that translate ancient insight into everyday practice, subscribe now and stay with me through the next steps. Stay with me, because what follows is not theory alone. It is an invitation to test and to feel. Define love as law. Before we move, we must agree on language. When Edgar Cayce spoke of love, he did not mean just warm sentiment or a fleeting rush of affection. He described a force that organizes matter and meaning, a quality that holds atoms together, draws life upward, and aligns purpose. In practical terms for our time, we can call that force cohesion, creative intelligence, and relational power. Imagine white light. Through a prism, it seems to break into many colors: red, blue, green. Those colors look separate, but what you see are different expressions of the same underlying light interacting with conditions. Similarly, what we call gravity, electromagnetic attraction, chemical affinity, biological growth, and even what some call the law of attraction, are different modes in which one fundamental reality, love, manifests under particular conditions. Call it love as cohesion, the principle that brings parts into a functional whole. Call it love as intelligence, an ordering current that knows how a system should work and nudges it toward greater harmony. Call it love as creative power, the impulse that generates novelty in life. Together, these are not sentimental abstractions but operational descriptions. They describe what happens when relationships between particles, cells, people, communities are aligned rather than fractured. A river makes an image useful here. If you place a leaf on its surface, the current carries it with ease. The leaf participates, moves, and finds a place. If you swim upstream against that current, you tire, scrape yourself, and eventually are pulled under by resistance. Cayce's readings suggest that when we live with the current of love, when our intentions, thoughts, and actions align with life's organizing principle, we move with ease. When we resist, we suffer. This language, cohesion, intelligence, creative power, lets us speak of love without reducing it to cliches. It gives us a working lens to look at illness, conflict, and even social breakdown. Evidence, in story and resonance. Cayce came from a Christian background, but his readings often crossed into metaphysical territory. He treated love as a measurable sign. Where life grows, love is present. Where decay appears, love is occluded. He approached individual cases as tests of practical alignment rather than only mechanical repair. Consider one vignette he often referenced in different forms. A woman whose cells rebelled in ways her doctors called cancer. Cayce's responses to those who sought him did not deny surgery or treatment. Instead, he framed the problem on several levels. Physically, there were obstructions, nutritional and structural imbalances that needed attending. Emotionally and spiritually, there were long-standing patterns of withholding, unresolved self-judgment, and a life rhythm that had become out of harmony with others and self. In his view, disease revealed a contraction of the life force, love, at those levels. Healing, then, required attending both to the body and to the underlying resistance. Changing diet and care, yes, but also recognizing where the person had been denying connection, refusing tenderness to themselves, or living in patterns of guilt that starved the inner current. Another story Cayce used frequently involved a man who had lost movement in parts of his body, paralysis that modern medicine sometimes could not fully explain. In Cayce's readings, the blockage was not only in nerves or muscle, it was also in the life patterns that had hardened the fields around those tissues. A life of retracted giving, fear, and a refusal to receive support. The path to renewed motion, in those accounts, required both physical rehabilitation and a transformation of relational posture, learning to accept help, to forgive, to trust the flow of giving and receiving. Movement returned, not because some magical incantation was spoken, but because the person's inner field allowed the current to pass. These vignettes are not guarantees. They are invitations to a broader diagnosis. What we call disease is often a signal that love's current is being obstructed. When the body is cut off from restoring flows, nutritional, circulatory, neural, or when the person's relational and emotional systems are sealed, life cannot fully express itself. This is the language Cayce used: disease as restriction, healing as realignment. Cayce's language can sound mystical, so it helps to place a few modern corollaries beside it. Researchers in fields like psychophysiology have shown that emotions affect hormonal cascades and immune function. HeartMath studies suggest that coherent, calm heart rhythms correlate with improved cognitive flexibility. Certain intention experiments show correlations, small and tentative, between focused consciousness and subtle physical or informational shifts at a distance. Quantum physics, often misapplied in pop spirituality, does introduce the notion that observation and interaction are entwined. None of this proves metaphysics. Instead, they are echoes, resonances, suggesting that consciousness and relation matter in ways older scientific models did not fully account for. Cayce's claim that love is the organizing law is thus not a statement that replaces science. It is a metaphysical hypothesis that finds suggestive harmonies in some contemporary lines of inquiry. Mechanism: how one law wears many masks. If love is the root, how does it appear as different laws? Let's map a few familiar concepts through the prism of love as force. Gravity. It keeps planets in orbit and apples on the tree. Seen through Cayce's lens, gravity is the expression of attraction, an ordering pull between entities that belongs to the field of relational cohesion. Masses attract, systems seek stability. These tendencies can be read as tendencies toward relational alignment. Electromagnetism and chemistry. Atoms bond, molecules form, cells organize into tissues. The same principle of fitting, complementary structures finding functional unity, reads well as love as intelligence, the algorithm by which parts know how to cohere for life. Causality and karma-like patterns. Actions seed consequences because relationships carry memory. When you act with kindness, patterns of trust grow. When you act from division, more division ripples outward. This is love as resonance. Your orientation draws back similar notes. Entropy and decay. Entropy describes the tendency toward disorder in closed, unregenerated systems. Seen spiritually, decay happens when life's currents are blocked, when renewal is resisted. Systems that refuse exchange, no input, no repair, move toward breakdown. Love here is the regenerative impulse that introduces order through relationship, exchange, and creativity. The so-called law of attraction. This contemporary phrase often implies that thought alone magnetizes outcomes. Cayce's readings nuance the idea. Intention matters, but intention without aligned action, character, and relational responsibility is misdirected. The field responds not merely to wishful thinking, but to the coherence of being. A heart that is generous, a life that practices integrity, and a mind that sees unity will resonate differently with circumstances than one that acts from fear or manipulation. In short, each law is a mode in which the foundational current, love, interacts with structures, conditions, and choices. This perspective reframes mechanics as relational dynamics, suffering as resistance, a therapeutic diagnosis. If love is the current that orders life, then suffering is most often the result of resisting that current. That statement can sound trite or moralizing, so let us be careful. Resistance is rarely a simple moral failing. It is layered, biological, psychological, relational, cultural. People resist because they were wounded, betrayed, or frightened. Resistance can be self-protective. It can be adaptive in trauma. To say suffering is resistance is to diagnose, not to shame. Think of a limb held rigid after injury. The body contracts around pain to protect. Over time, that contraction becomes a pattern, Muscles atrophy, circulation slows, nerves misfire. The limb becomes less a part of the whole. Emotionally, people erect similar protections. A heart that has been betrayed will constrict to avoid further hurt. That constriction reduces the flow of vitality. It narrows perception, shrinks possibility, and increases the probability of further harm. In medical terms, chronic stress dysregulates immune, endocrine, and nervous systems. In metaphysical terms, contraction reduces participation in the love current. The result is suffering. Cayce's readings emphasized responsibility without blame. He suggested that sometimes corrective discomfort is part of reorientation, a tough love moment where boundaries and consequences bring learning. Parents who allow a child to face natural consequences are practicing a form of love that refuses indulgence. Societies, too, meet imbalance with corrective measures. But the difference between corrective boundaries and punitive retribution is motive. Corrective love seeks restoration. Punitive action seeks domination. How do we distinguish helpful suffering from needless pain? Context and intention. If an experience catalyzes growth and re-entry into relationship, it may be part of a restorative process. If it simply perpetuates harm, it is not loving. Cayce's framework pushes us toward a compassionate analysis. What function is this suffering serving? Is it calling you to soften, to change pattern, to ask for help? Within that compassionate frame sits practical urgency. Restoring the flow of love into the blocked zones requires both care and courage. It requires medical and psychological attention when appropriate, and it requires inner work, recognizing habits of contraction, forgiving where possible, and learning to receive care. Therapeutic practices, the protocol for realignment to you. If love is the law and suffering shows resistance, then our task becomes one of alignment. Practical steps that reopen avenues of cohesion, intelligence, and creative power. Below is a protocol rooted in Cayce's approach and adapted for modern life. These practices are complementary. They should accompany, not replace, professional medical or psychiatric care when needed. 1. Recognize identity as participatory. Begin by internalizing a simple thesis. You are not primarily a separate, isolated agent. You are a node in a web of relational life. This does not erase individuality. It simply situates you within an interdependent field. When you see yourself as part of a living system, your choices begin to shift toward connection over separation. 2. Start with self-love, operationally defined. Self-love here means tending your body, mind, and heart with coherence. It means good sleep, appropriate nourishment, boundary setting that preserves integrity, and kindness toward your own mistakes. Self-love is practice, not indulgence. It is the soil from which giving outward can be sustained. 3. Forgiveness as release, not approval. Forgiveness clears the energetic backlog that keeps you tethered to past harms. It does not mean condoning abuse or removing necessary boundaries. It means you stop carrying the injury as a defining weight. 2 breathing exercises can help. The first, softening the chest while imagining exhaling the specific memory of harm. The second, establishing a container for boundary. Visualizing a gentle, strong perimeter that allows you to receive good and repel harm. 4. Love the problem. This paradox is central in Cayce's practice. Rather than demonizing symptoms or opponents, address them as parts that need care. If you have chronic back pain, speak to your back as you would to a child. Name the pain, acknowledge its fear, express intention to work with it. This is not magical thinking. It is a way to humanize and thereby engage regulatory systems that respond to narrative and attention. Clinical studies show that focused, compassionate attention can shift pain perception and modulate inflammatory responses. The practice requires consistency, not theatrics. 5. Give and receive. Resilience arises from reciprocal relation. Find places to give that are sustainable and places to receive that are dignifying. Many people are spiritually exhausted because they only give or only receive under guilt. Balance rebuilds flow. 6. Tough love and boundaries. Practice correction that is proportionate, transparent, and aimed at restoration. If a relationship harms your capacity to participate in life, establish limits that protect your coherence. Tell the truth calmly, hold consequences, and continue to act from a place of concern for the whole. Boundaries are not walls. They are channels that keep the current alive. 7. Community and accountability. Healing often needs witnesses and allies. Find a mentor, join a small group, or work with a therapist or spiritual director who understands relational healing. Isolation amplifies resistance. 8. Embodied practices. Movement, breath, rhythm, and touch. These are pathways of love's current. Walk, dance, practice breath coherence, and allow restorative touch where appropriate. These activities recalibrate nervous systems and reopen circulation. Micro-exercise, a simple 90-second practice you can do now. This is not a prayer in the doctrinal sense, but a brief, practical visualization to shift your field. Sit comfortably. Close your eyes if that's safe. Place one hand over your heart and one hand over a place of physical or emotional discomfort. Could be a literal pain or a weight you carry. Breathe in for 4 counts, out for 6. As you exhale, imagine drawing a soft, warm light. Color it however feels right, into your heart. On the next in-breath, imagine that warmth expanding. On the out-breath, let it circulate to the place of discomfort. Say silently, I am here with you. Repeat for 6 breaths. Allow the hand on that spot to feel the pulse of your presence. Let this be a message of recognition, not of forcing a cure. When you finish, rest for a moment and notice any small shifts. Calmer breath, slight ease, altered perspective. Remember, this practice complements care. It may bring relief. It may open a new angle to approach healing. It does not replace medical evaluation or treatment when those are needed. Science as resonant signal, not verdict. A necessary word about science. Many modern studies point toward the deep interplay between mind, heart, emotions, and physiology. HeartMath researchers document physiological coherence and its influence on cognitive function. Psychoneuroimmunology shows how stress alters immune responses. Small intention studies report correlations between focused consciousness and subtle changes in distant systems. Quantum physics reminds us that observation affects outcomes at microscales. None of these findings prove metaphysical claims about a universal law called love. They do, however, create a field of resonance, suggestive signals that the world is more relational and responsive than older mechanistic models assumed. Edgar Cayce's claim that love is the universal law sits more comfortably as a metaphysical lens that invites inquiry. It invites scientific exploration rather than arrogantly claiming scientific victory. That humility is essential. It keeps the door open for integration, spiritual wisdom informing practice, and careful empirical work refining understanding. Social implications and the civilizational question. If love truly is the organizing principle, what happens when societies structure themselves around separation? Look at systems that value extraction, domination, and narrow self-interest. They tend toward collapse, ecological breakdown, social fragmentation, and psychological malaise. Conversely, systems designed to cultivate reciprocity, health, and shared flourishing show resilience. Cayce's readings envisioned a long-term cultural movement where love-based structures, healthcare that heals, economies that sustain life, education that fosters belonging, gradually replace brittle systems built on fear. This does not require idealism without accountability. A society organized by love would not be naive. It would employ tough love, institutions that encourage responsibility, that remove privileges for harm, and that enforce boundaries to preserve the common good, where systems encourage gift, repair harm promptly, and provide safety nets. Human potential rises. Imagine leadership that measures success by coherence, how people feel, how relationships function, how ecosystems regenerate, rather than by narrow GDP or short-term conquest. That shift would be slow and contingent but not impossible. Small networks of aligned people can seed new norms. The crucial work is local, concrete, and repetitive, raising children with empathy, designing workplaces that honor rest and creativity, tending neighborhoods so they become webs of mutual support. The afterlife as degrees of recognition, not punitive finality. One of the most sensitive parts of Cayce's vision involves the afterlife. He described a post-mortem process less as divine punishment and more as an honest reckoning. Souls meet the patterns they embodied, and that recognition becomes the curriculum. Those who lived in relational openness experienced joy and continued growth. Those who entrenched separation encounter the dissonance of their choices and often continue working through consequences until alignment is restored. This model should be presented carefully. It is a metaphysical interpretation, not a doctrinal replacement for any particular faith teaching. For many, it offers consolation. There is no cosmic tyrant gleefully exacting revenge. There is an ordered field where awareness naturally reflects back one's patterns. The final authority in this view is not an external executioner, but the law of relationship itself, how you resonated in life. This encourages moral responsibility without hysteria. The consequences of our choices are real, and they matter because they tune our capacity to love. A 7-day experiment. See everything as love teaching you. Here is the practical invitation. For 7 days, adopt a deliberate posture. Perceive events, people, symptoms, and difficulties as messages from the living field of love. This is an experiment in perception as much as practice. Do it alongside your ordinary commitments. There is no need to retreat from life. Daily prompts. Day 1. Notice the current. Spend the day observing where things feel easy and where they feel constricted. Take notes. What situations drain you? What interactions feel effortless? Day 2. Self-attunement. Begin each morning with the 90-second practice above. Add one small act of self-care, extra sleep, a healthy meal, or a 10-minute walk. Day 3. Speak to the problem. Identify one persistent issue, pain, anxiety, a recurring conflict. Spend 5 minutes naming it and saying aloud, "I see you, I will listen." Do not attempt to fix. Offer recognition. Day 4. Radical generosity. Give something small without agenda. A genuine compliment, an unexpected help, a donation. Notice how giving shifts your inner weather. Day 5. Receive. Seek to accept something offered to you without immediately balancing it. Let someone do for you and notice internal resistance. Breathe through the discomfort. Day 6. Boundary is love. Identify one place where you need to say no for the sake of your coherence. Practice a short, kind, firm phrase and use it when the moment arises. Day 7. Reflection and integration. Write about the week. Where did your perception change? Which moments felt like small openings? Which habits tightened? Commit to one sustainable practice you will carry forward. Throughout the week, when you notice suffering, others or your own, frame it as a clue rather than a verdict. Ask, what is this calling me to learn? How might compassion and wise action restore flow? Share one insight in the comments after the week. Others will benefit from the collective learning. A few practical notes for safety and ethics. This experiment is not a substitute for medical diagnosis or treatment. If you have a serious condition, continue with your prescribed care. The practices here are complementary. Tools to increase attunement and resilience. Climax. The invitation to remember. If Edgar Cayce's astonishing revelation is true in the sense that it offers a useful lens, that love functions as an organizing principle, then the real work is not to chase love as an external prize, but to remember you are already implicated in it. Memory here is reorientation. It is a practice of aligning intention, action, and relationship with life's current. This is not passive surrender. It is courageous engagement, acknowledging where you have been closed, taking boundaries where needed, choosing to forgive when possible, and giving care generously. It is the daily labor of coherence. It is a politics of the heart enacted through small, consistent acts. Conclusion. Edgar Cayce's claim that love is the universal law invites us to translate spiritual insight into practical clarity. Treat love as cohesion, intelligence, creative power. See disease as a sign of resistance and healing as realignment. Practice self-love, forgiveness, and the paradox of loving the problem. Let science remain a partner of inquiry, not a final arbiter. And most of all, experiment. For 1 week, look at your life through the lens of love and report what shifts. You are not seeking love as if it were something outside you. You are remembering the current in which you already swim. Try the 7-day experiment, share what arises in the comments, and subscribe if you want more careful, practical teachings that bridge inner work and everyday living.